Hello and welcome to another edition of Agenda 2063 TV show, the only show in Ghana, the region, continent, telling authentic and important stories about Africa's integration. And although we're spending the better part of this series talking a bit about the African Continental Free Trade Area, we will still get back to the issue of Agenda 2063. My name is E.K Bensah Jr., your regular host. Nice to be coming home into your studios, into your laptops, into wherever you may be. And we'll be right back with some two segments.
4 years ago, like most young people, I was clueless as to what I wanted to do and which institution would help me realize a great career. What better place to pursue this dream than Blue Crest College, with state-of-the-art lecture halls and experienced lecturers, as well as equipped computer labs. Blue Crest is indeed the right starting point. With certificate, diploma and degree programs in information technology, business administration, journalism, oil and gas, Blue Crest is the one-stop institute for everyone who is looking to have a great career. Enroll now. Visit www.bluecrest.edu.gh or call any of the numbers on the screen. Blue Crest College. Education for life.
Welcome back from the break and welcome to another edition of APRM Watch, where today we zoom into some of the latest news around the African peer review mechanism. Now, last week I came across rather fortuitously a group on Facebook called #EngageAPRM. It's easy to find. It was created by Stephen Grutst, a staffer at the South African Institute for International Affairs. It has 575 members and was created in 2010. It's a public group that seeks to help CSOs, that's civil society organizations, and individuals share information about APRM and governance in Africa. There's some members of the group include staff who actually work there, youth, and ordinary people who want to just understand APRM. It's a fairly vibrant group that posts articles on stories in the media that refer to the APRM. Given that it was established in 2010, 9 years before the APRM Communications Network, it's arguable that it's an important predecessor to awareness raising of the APRM that ever existed. So for those who are new to the APRM, it's a great opportunity to keep updated on the AUR organ, as well as, of course, checking out the APRM's website on aprm-au.org and then at APRM.org on Twitter as well. Thank you. We'll be right back for the next break. Welcome back from the break and welcome to another edition of Ear on East Africa on a week in which, actually in the week in which we celebrate AU Day. AU Day was just the 9th September. Some of you may be wondering why the AU celebrates so many days, but that's a question you have to ask the policymakers. You don't have to ask us. Just take advantage of the fact that it's a holiday that you can use to learn a bit more about the African Union and, of course, Agenda 2063. Now, for me today, it's a little bit of a personal story. For this month of September is actually 5 years since I first stepped foot into Tanzania and later Kenya. I actually had the privilege of traveling to Addis months earlier for an AU conference. Personally, 2015 was my all-important foray into East Africa. That's when I learned a lot more about the region and ways in which I could not imagine. But what was most remarkable for me was the fact that I only needed my letter of invite from the organization in question and then just my passport. Now, for Ghanaians who are traveling to Kenya and Tanzania, it's really like traveling to West Africa. There's no visa required. Now, for Ethiopia, as many of you will now know, visa is on arrival. But back in 2015, you needed your visa from Accra before traveling to Addis. A lot of things, obviously, have changed. And of course, whilst we're talking about change, COVID has changed so many things as well. Because of COVID, 2020 offers a very, very different scenario because of the pandemic. While Ghana has opened its airports, for example, not all African countries have yet to follow suit, so we don't quite know exactly what is going on. But the experience with Ghana has become a different affair, where one needs to pass through COVID-19 protocols and then pay huge sums. We know some of the sums are huge because other countries are telling us, people from other countries, in their countries it's not as expensive. So we must put it on record, it's quite expensive. But what, for example, some of the friends that we have who are in Nairobi are telling us that the entry into Nairobi, before you enter Nairobi, you need a negative COVID-19 certificate. That's all you need to carry before you actually enter Kenya. As to the rest of East Africa, how that works, we'll be telling you a little bit more over the next couple of segments, and how that will affect also travel by non-East Africans, because without a doubt, Aeon East Africa will need to help you understand how that will work. So whether Tanzania, it's a lot less complicated, whether Uganda, it's so on and so forth. We need some unpacking of that as well, so that in the event that you need to travel to that region, you know. But from what I can tell you from Addis, speaking to some AU people who have gone up and down to Addis, even the AU people are complaining how expensive it is coming to Accra, because you need to do a test over there and then come and do a test over here. So let's keep our fingers crossed on these COVID-19 protocols and see what we can do to also help build awareness and momentum on what is required to enter some of these countries, because money does not grow from trees. You need to find the money somewhere to be able to enter these territories and back as well. So we hope we can put some pressure to bear on some of these issues as well. But definitely throughout the rest of this series on East Africa, we shall keep you updated on these developments. Thank you once again, and we'll have another exciting edition for you next week. We'll be right back. Welcome back from the break, and once again, welcome to another editorial. This is the third editorial of its kind, which is entitled, it's coming under Aspiration 7 of Africa's A Game, and it's called Close Encounters of the Third Kind, APRM and the Pursuit of Afro-Democracy. Now, you may recall that the other editorials, one of the first things that I did in September, August, was to remind you of Benjamin Franklin's quotation, which was, think of these three things: whence you came, where you are going, and to whom you must account. And I referred to the Abuja Treaty and then APRM, and I said we're going to now talk about AFTA. So the whole essence is that when we started this editorial last month, we were seeking to push boundaries on what we could offer on content by offering 4 editorials underscoring the AU as a global player. So the first one said the wider landscape for the editorials. The second one also offered an unpacking of what was happening with the Abuja Treaty and the African Economic Community, and setting the stage for whether there could be some kind of African governance. In September, we returned to the remaining 2 editorials, which focuses actually on APRM, and then the final one next week could be on African Continental Free Trade Area. Now, today's editorial is entitled Close Encounters of the Third Kind, APRM and the Pursuit of Afro-Democracy. And it's a little bit of a mischievous nudge and wink to all sorts of genres. We have sci-fi, we have slapstick comedy, we have political science all rolled into one. Now, the whole editorial, truth be told, can be explained away in the title. You see, Close Encounters of a Third Kind is a 1977 Steven Spielberg film that tells the story of a government worker who comes into contact with an extraterrestrial. Now, the history behind the film is important because it includes an important classification by one Dr. Hynek, who was also one of the consultants of that film, about what the first, second, and third encounter entails. Now, the first classification encounter is the sighting of a UFO. The second kind is getting the physical evidence and proof of existence of a UFO. Now, finally, the third kind, or that would inform the title, Close Encounters of the Third Kind, is the actual contact with the UFO. When we appropriate this to the APRM, we get this funny scenario where the first kind of a close encounter is citing the APRM in books, in publications of the AU, because for a lot of people here in APRM for the first time, the APRM is an alien being as well. The second kind is proof of existence. For me, when I was actually participating in the first African governance test, if you will, of Ghana's elections in 2008, where I actually went to vote, that was when I actually felt that I was participating in governance in 2008. Then the third kind of encounter is the actual contact with key staff of the African Peer Review Mechanism, when in 2019 I was privileged to be invited to some of their meetings where they were seeking to promote APRM and the work that they do. But we're still sticking with threes because they say good things come in threes. And if it's true, then it is important to help unpack why the three dominates in today's editorial. Let's take a look at some of the reasons why. Aspiration 3 of Agenda 2063 speaks to an Africa of good governance, democracy, respect for human rights, justice, and the rule of law. Article 3 of the AU Constitutive Act, which is the major framework of the African Union, let's say the treaty for member states, govern how member states would work within the African Union. It includes the following objectives: greater unity and solidarity between African countries and peoples of Africa, defending the sovereignty, territorial integrity, and independence of its member states, promoting peace, security, and stability on the continent, promoting democratic principles and institutions, popular participation, and governance. Truth be told, the AU has a set of shared values that could be categorized under democracy and good governance, peace and security, and continental development and integration. And finally, on the third, termism. The West African sub-region is arguably the only region on the continent that has just one country going through a third term, and that's Togo. All the other ones, even though there's a crisis underway in Mali, where ECOWAS has given an ultimatum for Mali to come up with a government, most of the member states in the sub-region are at peace and have gone through two terms. ECOWAS is probably the only regional economic community that has come out explicitly to frown upon third-termism. Third-termism, which has become a safe way for authoritarian countries to outwit the populace on continuing power. So they go to parliament, get parliamentarians to vote and say that they've extended their power. And therefore, that one, no one goes to war, there's nothing. It's just that they've legitimized cheating. So that is the third-termism, which ECOWAS doesn't like, but we haven't heard so much about this liking it in SADC or in East Africa, or certainly not in Algeria, in the Arab countries. So there's a lot of work that needs to be done, but for ECOWAS, at least we can pat ourselves on the back that we've made a lot of headway. And one proof of this, of course, is the Gambia. Now, some of you may say that Gambia was too long in coming. Look at what happened. Jammeh had been there for 22 years before finally ECOWAS came in. But the point is that ECOWAS did finally come in and finally stamped its a voice of disapproval that Jammeh had made the stance he was going to leave, and now he had, so we know what happened in 2017, reason for which earned ECOWAS a nomination for Peace Prize for the efforts that ECOWAS made to get Jammeh out of power. Now, in the title, I've referred to Afro-Democracy. Afro-Democracy, for me, is just a whimsical way of describing what already exists in AU circles under the African governance architecture. Now, the African governance architecture, much like the African peace and security architecture, is a platform which is inspired by the Constitutive Act of the African Union and was established as a mechanism composed of AU organs, institutions, and the recs. These include the Pan-African Parliament, APRM, it includes AU Anti-Corruption Board as well, and then the AU's Department of Political Affairs. This platform functions to facilitate stakeholder dialogue for the harmonization and coordination of instruments and initiatives for promoting good governance, democracy. That's why you have the Pan-African Parliament, for example, there. Good governance, that's where the APRM is there. Rule of law and human rights, that's why the AU Anti-Corruption Board is there. Now, the platform's focus is on implementation of the AU shared values, including the African Charter of Democracy, Elections, and Governance, which is a key framework that the AU likes to promote and refer to for people to understand how we prosecute democracy on the continent. Now, as we are saying all this, it's important to also speak a little about the history of the African peer review mechanism. It sounds, from what I've described so far, as if today is the birthday of the APRM. Far from it, but it is an important conversation to have about the African peer review mechanism. I think we've quite established that the African peer review mechanism was established in 2003. Now, when we go back, we realize that the AU was established in 2000, shortly after the CERTA Declaration of 9 September 1999 in Libya. And then the AU, they met in Medran in 2000, and then NEPAD was born in 2001. So the APRM is actually a baby of NEPAD, which is something a lot of people don't talk about so much these days, because NEPAD is now the AU Development Agency, but it's AU Development Agency, AUDA/NEPAD. But APRM is a product of NEPAD and has gone a long way from what it used to be. As you will know from the APRM watch that I've spoken to before, the APRM, Ghana was one of the first countries to undertake this whole writing of the APRM. Kenya also was as well. And APRM has been used for predicting a lot of things. But if the APRM, for a lot of people who are just entering into it first time, all they really need to know is that the APRM is the AU's primary institution responsible for facilitating the voluntary assessment of governance in participating member states and also monitoring their adherence to the ACDEG, or the African Charter on Democracy, Elections, and Governance. So, in fact, when you reflect and you look back, you realize that there is a structure that has been put in place by member states on how they should prosecute this whole democracy, peace, and all these things that we like to talk about. Yes, it is true that member states have not always got it right, and we see in Cameroon, and we see in some of the Central African states that they're still not in democracy, that they still have a long way to go. But when you look on the continent and you look at the influence and the extent of the power, some of these instruments, African Charter on Democracy, Elections, and Governance, for example, in 2015, Burkina Faso used it in reference to the coup when Blaise Compaoré was kicked out of power in Burkina Faso. The AU could not find a specific term to describe what happened to Blaise Compaoré, whether it was a coup and it was clearly not a coup. It was not military soldiers who went in and took him out. It was the people. It was a popular uprising. And even though the coup broke out on Twitter, some of us know this because we are monitoring. The so-called coup broke out on Twitter, and some people reported it on Twitter at the time that Burkina Faso was in crisis, was in trouble. The AU did not send in anyone and say that Burkina Faso was going to be under any kind of sanctions, because it was the people who said they no longer wanted Blaise Compaoré, and so Blaise Compaoré obviously had to flee. But reference was made much later in reflection on that conflict or that particular situation, that the popular uprising, there's a clause in the African Charter of Democracy, Elections, and Governance that speaks to popular risings as well, legitimizing why popular risings can be used as a way of getting leaders out. Of course, it is frowned, unconstitutional coups are frowned upon in that document of ACDEG, but the popular uprising seems to be a way that is supported somehow implicitly by the AU. So that's very, very interesting to realize that, and also set a precedent for a lot of member states that if you're not careful, the people are unhappy with the things that are going on. The AU will not say that they have done wrong, but the AU will make references to some of these charters, because basically it is there for the people to refer to, that it is not a coup. Popular uprisings are not coups. They're very, very, very different from coups. And therefore, that can be used to help also promote democracy and get out leaders who are not doing the things they need to do for their country. So getting back to the APRM's mandate was expanded in 2017 and was transformed into an innovative tool for sharing best practices. What it basically does, it seeks to track the implementation of Agenda 2063 and the UN Sustainable Development Goals. Its flagship is what I have here, is the African Governance Report, which it intends to provide a foundation for regular and continuous tracking of governance and to underline shared best practices among member states. Now, that's a whole mouthful, basically, to say that what it's seeking to do is to offer important tracking of governance across member states. So what is happening in Ghana, what is happening in Liberia, what is happening in South Africa, how are they prosecuting their governance? What are they doing about their governance? Are they doing the right things? Are they elected? How are the elections of local assemblies? All these things. So the Africa Governance Report is a dramatic and important contribution that the APRM offers. And this is what it launched in the consolidated launch in Nairobi in 2019 to help policymakers, researchers, civil society people understand that it is so very important to continue monitoring our governance, because we do not have a perfect, even in Ghana that we talk about being a democracy, island of peace and oasis of chaos, we still have issues which we need to smoothen and straighten out in our governance. So these are some of the important areas that the APRM has found its footing. And for some of us, we foresee that it will continue to see a lot of its footing under. So those are some of the things to watch out for as we think through how the APRM has pursued this whole conversation on Afro-democracy. Let's remember that the APRM, much like the Afrobarometer, is paying a lot of attention and has paid a lot of attention to looking at Africa's governance, but will continue to do a lot more. Right now, the APRM is also looking at corporate governance. It's looking at cross-border trade. What is it that, for example, at the borders, what is it that they can do, the APRM can do to ensure that there's some kind of ethical, appreciation of trading across borders and things like that. So the APRM is an organization that we must all look out for and we must all celebrate. The staff is not that huge, but they're doing a lot of great work and traveling across the continent to make sure that African governance is African and it's not borrowed from the West. It's doing things that the West has done, but we are picking on our own stories. So in summary and in conclusion, let's not pretend that we have already forgotten the devastation of COVID-19. COVID-19, we all know, has had dramatic impacts on ordinary lives. And some of these impacts remains unwritten and unscripted, but they are certainly unprecedented. And its impact on ordinary Africans is still work in progress. We don't really know. It's only been a couple of months. Yes, airlines have opened and all these things, but still, the history will be the judge of how COVID came to upturn our lives for better and for worse. As for 2020, for those of you who blinked and saw January, February, and then COVID, and then December, November, December, well, there's nothing we can do about that. But what we can do when we reflect on 2020 and how 2020 was supposed to be silencing of the guns, we can say that 2020 in many ways did not fulfill the desire to be a year of silencing the guns. All we can say is that COVID forced people to silence the guns because people needed to be healthy to even be holding a gun in the first place. COVID was taking a lot of lives and has sadly taken a lot of lives. But even with COVID's furtive attempts to derail the silencing of the guns, some of us believe that the silencing of the guns is not over and it has stood the test of time. It is certainly something that is still underway on Twitter. Discussions are still had on Twitter about silencing the guns. People still want to make sure that we do not forget that guns have caused major problems in the world, and we need to make sure those guns are demobilized, de-radicalized, and gotten rid of. But there's also no gainsaying that the road to peace commences with silencing the guns, as it creates a more conducive atmosphere to growth of all sorts, whether it's economic growth, whether it's political growth, and so on and so forth. But for us, and for this editorial, the growth that we're talking about is the growth that is the kind that we need to see in the African continental free trade area, the subject of which will be the final editorial in this series. Thank you once again. To listen to us talk a lot about what the African Union has done, is doing, and will continue to do. It is an important conversation narrative that we need to all have in our homes, and we believe that we are helping people provoke their minds and their thoughts on what the AU can do better, especially now that the African Continental Free Trade Area Secretary has been commissioned in Ghana. It is time for us to push the AU as a global player in consonance with Aspiration 7 of Agenda 2063. We can do it. So whilst we're doing it, let's also remember that we can leave comments that are scrolling across the screen. We can go to @AAU_67 on Twitter, leave messages when the video is premiered on Facebook and YouTube, and continue to also check out a lot of the other programs on AAU TV for the great work that they're doing, pushing the African agenda wherever they may be. My name is E.K Bensah Jr., coming your way once again for another exciting edition. We'll speak to you next week. Hope you have a great day and keep reading your Agenda 2063 booklet. Have a great day. Thank you. Goodbye.